Hello and welcome to the first episode of our new game review series. I am your host Gohomoth, and today we will be looking at System Shock 2. System Shock 2 is a first-person shooter developed in 1999 by Rational Games and Looking Glass Studios. It is also one of the most famous PC games of the time period. The main designer, Ken Levine, later went on to create the iconic BioShock series. While it is a direct sequel to the original System Shock, you don't need to have any former knowledge of it in order to appreciate System Shock 2. You don't even need to watch the intro cutscenes of System Shock 2 in order to understand what's going on, but it helps nevertheless. The main gist of it is, you're a cyber soldier stuck on a spaceship that's been invaded by some sort of alien host, and you need to survive. You've been contacted by Dr. Janice Polito, who knows how to stop the aliens. More on that in the story segment. As formerly mentioned, System Shock 2 is a first-person shooter. However, it also incorporates a lot of RPG elements, stuff like stats, skills, and weapons classes. At the start of the game, you get to pick between one of three jobs, which sort of correspond to the usual three fantasy classes. Those three jobs are the Marine, Navy Sailor, and OSA Agent. These don't set the way you play in stone, you can still do whatever you want with your character later, but they definitely help you with acquiring some useful skills depending on the class you chose. The Marine plays the most like your usual fantasy RPG fighter. He is the easiest to understand, but also the hardest to actually play due to the importance of secondary skills in the game. The Navy Sailor is sort of like your rogue. He specializes in secondary skills like hacking, while foregoing the weapons expertise of the Marine. The OSA Agent is the mage of this game, utilizing psionic abilities to defeat his enemies. He is probably the most complicated of the three classes, but also the most powerful. While the psionic skills may not look like much on first glance, an OSA agent at its prime can throw fireballs, increase damage reduction by more than 50%, heal himself, increase his strength and agility to superhuman levels, or be invisible. However, opting heavily into psionics will usually rid you of the upgrade points required to advance your stats and skills. You see, upgrade points, or cyber modules as they are called in this game, are rewarded for exploration or doing game objectives. You can't max out all skills in the game, and the more you upgrade something, the more it'll cost you the next time you want to upgrade it. To make matters worse, some skills and stats are near worthless in the game, while others are almost mandatory. In general, hacking is incredible, and I'm not sure, but you might actually need at least 3 points in hacking in order to beat the game. On the other hand, research is worthless with more than 3 points, and even then there's an argument to be made that it's still not that great. Don't let that distract you from being a smart boy, however, but those cyber module cuts will need to happen sooner or later. The game itself does not help you in this regard, since it's not really something you would call forgiving. Ammo and health are scarce. Enemies respawn. While the game isn't unfair, it will test your skill. There aren't many enemy types, however, the little that are there are more than enough to ruin your day, and they are also boosted by the ship's security systems that will ring an alarm if you're spotted by cameras. Don't get spotted. If you do get spotted, run to the nearest security console to turn off the alarm and potentially shut security down altogether for a moment. Otherwise, be prepared to fight enemies that the game will keep spawning in until the alarm stops. Later on, the game starts preparing traps and ambushes for you. Those are fun. Enemies respawn differently depending on what sort of weapon or ammo you're using. For example, anti-personnel ammo is great against squishy organic aliens. Against turrets and robots though, it's not quite as good. Not all weapons have multiple ammo types though, and that kinda makes the game unbalanced. You could spec into energy weapons for machines and advanced exotic weapons for organic enemies. Or you could just go with standard weapons for half the modules and 3 times the ammo types. Heavy weapons seem the least affected by this problem, since the grenade launcher has the most ammo types in the game, but other heavy weapons are pretty bad. Weapons break over time, and you can repair them provided you have enough points in the repair skill. You can also maintain them with the maintenance tool and maintenance skill. Hacking lets you open locked boxes, open locked doors, and hack turrets to fight enemies for you. Just don't hack two turrets that are in proximity to one another. Hacking and repair are done through Connect 3 minigames. The likelihood of success is based on your stats and skills. You can keep trying to hack or repair as long as you have enough credits to do so. But be careful, because the squares with brown outlines perform a critical fail if you don't do them successfully. This could mean doors breaking down, or other, more problematic issues. Not again. So, the system is kinda complicated and a bit clunky and unbalanced. Other RPG games at the time suffered from similar problems, and this one is actually not really that bad. The game is surprisingly playable, even today, since the mechanics and controls are pretty intuitive and understandable. Compare this to the original, and the difference is night and day. What is this? What is that? How do I move? How do I shoot? What sort of nightmare realm am I in? The movement in this game is pretty good too. It's not quite as smooth as something like Half-Life or Quake, but it's far from problematic or annoying. Another remnant of a bygone time is the way you progress to the game. The game has a lot of backtracking, vague hints on where to go next, and you can sometimes get lost. I personally have nothing against that sort of game design. I actually quite like games where you need to explore in order to get around, but I dislike the fact that some mandatory key codes are hidden in audio logs that aren't obviously shown to the player, or that sometimes you can miss on where to go next because you didn't hear someone say that they wished to meet you at the ship's bridge. What's worse is that you don't really unlock new areas by backtracking. You just pop back to do that one thing you couldn't do before, and then return to whatever floor you're supposed to be on. Other games of the time period usually had powerful optional rewards or new areas to explore when you backtrack. This feels a bit more forced and unnecessary. Once again, it's not terrible in this regard, and there's certainly more confusing games out there, but do keep a walkthrough or something handy in case you get stuck. The main thing to understand here is that System Shock 2 was developed in 1999. Compared to other influential games out there, the graphics may not look amazing nowadays, but the game is more than 20 years old at the time of this video's release. With that in mind, the visuals still manage to impress, especially with how scary these low-poly models can actually get. The cyborg midwife always stood out to me as pretty scary. Another important thing to note here is that the lighting and effects in this game are made pretty well. It really sells the scene. For example, the freezer area feels cold, and you can almost feel the surging heat of the boilers in this room. In fact, the spaceship you're stuck on has quite a lot of different areas, which all look distinct. That being said, I do have one problem with the environments, which is more of a personal pet peeve of mine. Sometimes the environments in this game feel like they're a bit too blue. The only other instance of this happening that I can think of off the top of my head would be Fallout 3, but Fallout 3 really amplifies that effect by a lot. And System Shock 2 is much more benign. In any case, the graphics, while they may not look that impressive, still work and sell the scene very well. This game sports a pretty good atmospheric soundtrack, sometimes. It can really make you fear something, sometimes. Why? Because half the soundtrack are scary ambient tracks that keep you on your toes, and half the soundtrack are absolute bangers that hype you up like there's no tomorrow. It's supposed to keep you on your toes during the slow and scary parts and explode and get you on an adrenaline rush in key fights. When it does that, it's absolutely amazing, but it can also just as easily ruin suspense. I've heard people say you should play this game without the music. While I personally disagree, I can see where they're coming from. I like the in-your-face techno music, it hypes me up quite well, but I can definitely see people being weirded out by it after getting used to the ambience. Where the sound design really shines though, is with the enemy sounds. They are recognizable and can be truly scary at times, especially if you hear a dangerous enemy but can't see it. Please, no. The voice acting in this game is really solid too, especially for its time and budget. However, I found that the voice lines from the main story progression usually get mixed with the audio logs you find laying around. Well, I usually wouldn't complain too much about this since you get to choose when to listen to audio logs and you can re-listen audio logs. It is quite a problem in a setting where you always need to be on your guard because of enemies creeping about. I have nothing against listening to them after a different voice line ends, but grabbing a nice cup of tea while going through audio logs isn't high on the priority list when on a spaceship where literally everything is trying to kill you. This is mostly a personal problem though, and I might just be rushing through the game too much. All in all though, the sound design is amazing and adds a whole bunch to the experience. So to recap, you're stuck on a spaceship and there's aliens everywhere. You're contacted by Dr. Janice Polito, who basically tells you what to do for the first half of the game. You go from deck to deck, fixing things that were broken while you were sleeping in order to reach deck 4 to reach Dr. Polito and get out of this alive. So you reach Dr. Polito, and I know I already put a spoiler alert on the video, but I would once again like to warn you that I am about to spoil super important stuff for the game, and you should probably play the game if you haven't, before watching the rest of this video. This is one of the biggest reveals in gaming even today. So, is it safe? Okay, so Dr. Polito is dead. Shodan has been using her identity to trick you into helping her and to build trust. Basically, in the events of the first game, she created the Many as her biological counterpart, but the Many eventually broke free after she was defeated in the first game. Now, the Many are free and have their own ideas of conquering the world. So, you help Shodan correct her mistake, as she calls it, and you destroy shuttles through which the Many had plans to spread throughout space. And then take the fight to the Rickenbacker, the security ship that was escorting the ship that you were on until now, in order to try and escape. But turns out the Rickenbacker's looking even worse. What's interesting is that the game definitely makes you feel like you're being used, and it does that well. The two sides fighting here are the Many and Shodan. You're just Shodan's pawn. You do something, and then the Many reacts. Neither Shodan nor the Many care much about what happens to you. As a matter of fact, the Many don't even care about you that much until you start heavily messing up their plans. Then, they start playing seriously. They are definitely a force to be reckoned with, and they take the ship over faster than you can clean it up. So, you take the fight to the Many, and you literally go into the belly of the beast in order to take it out once and for all. I personally dislike this part of the game. I see a lot of people complaining about the Zen section of Half-Life. I like the Zen and feel like the biggest flaws of that section of Half-Life are magnified in the body of the Many. The movement's so weird inside, you get launched around, there's annoying jump puzzles, the entire area draws on just a bit too long, and there's an annoying boss fight. However, this also has additional problems. This area of the game is filled with some of the most spongy and annoying enemies in System Shock, and ammo's low, especially the sort of ammo you need to deal with organic enemies. As if that wasn't bad enough, you're completely screwed if you're one of the two people who decided they would rely on energy weapons for the whole game. The boss itself isn't really a boss either. It's a bunch of endgame monsters stuffed in a room and a big organ protected by 3 flying rocks. The brain, or heart, whatever that is, of the Many, doesn't even fight on its own. It's just a bunch of annoying enemies. It's not even especially challenging, you just gotta run in circles and never look back. It feels like wasted potential, but I guess that's because a lot of late 90s FPS endgame bosses kinda suck. So you're done with that, and you find out Shodan used you to become super powerful. You go into cyberspace, where Shodan started to mess with reality. Do a much more calmer segment, which is also a callback to the first game, and here's where I would put my Shodan footage, but as it turns out, my PC has decided that having save files is overrated and crashed while I was recording. Having decided that doing 10 more hours of gameplay, or 11 minutes if you're a speedrunner, just for that 5 minutes of boss fight footage is not worth it, I'll just put the image of the boss here and tell you what you'll need to do to beat her. The boss fight is less annoying than the Many, but still kinda annoying. You're stuck in a small room with the core in the center. The core is protected by shields that you need to hack open and Shodan's avatars that keep respawning when killed. After you take care of the shields, you have to destroy the core, and that's System Shock 2 over and done with. This boss fight is less annoying than the Many, but still kinda annoying. Overall, the story is pretty well done and it has great moments, but the end areas kinda drop that momentum. It really is a shame, especially since I think this could have been a masterpiece. If only there was less filler objectives and smoother final levels. Fortunately, the good parts more than make up for it, and I feel that it's still one of my more liked games story-wise. System Shock 2 is still an excellent game. I had a lot of fun playing it and wouldn't mind replaying it later, even though I had certain technical difficulties this time around. I think that it is still pretty accessible today, even if it might take some getting used to. If you think you might enjoy it, definitely give it a try. The gameplay holds up and the atmosphere is some of the best you can find in video games. It certainly has charm and it has aged better than most late 90s PC RPGs or RPG related games. It is also pretty cheap on Steam and GOG, and if you're not sure about it, I recommend waiting for a Steam sale or something and then picking it up when it's like 60% off. Thank you all for watching, and if you like what you see, tune in next video for a trip to the past, in more ways than one.